Good morning, everyone. This is Rachel with the Pediatric Pain Warriors Foundation, and I am so excited to bring you this webinar today with Mari Franklin. Mari is an attorney and an independent counselor, as well as an information scientist and a mother who helps families secure accommodations and services that allow students of all abilities to reach their educational potential. She has 2 children who live with chronic and acute pain, and she understands firsthand the medical and psychological uncertainties of being differently abled. Mari is an inclusion champion for all students and works with families to sort through their specific challenges to maximize their children's access to individualized access and a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. We're so excited that Mari is joining us today to share with us information on IEPs and 504s. If I can give you all a little bit of information, please make sure that you are muted, which you all should be. You will be able to see our screen, and you'll also see that there are questions. There's a question, and you can post any questions at any point, and we will be able to offer those to Mari, and she'll be able to answer for you. So with that being said, I'm going to pass this over to Mari, and we'll go from there.
Hi, thank you. My name's Mari Hawashi Franklin, and I am very excited to be speaking to fellow pain warriors about how we can make school work really well for our children. The title of my presentation is really quite intentional, that our students actually have several rights in the school setting to be educated, and the legal buzzwords are they have a legal right to a free and appropriate education in the least restrictive environment. Those words are just full of all kinds of meaning. They make me sort of glow with happiness about what that means for our kids. A free and appropriate public education doesn't mean a one-size-fits-all. It means an education that's appropriate to the talents and interests and the gifts that our children have. And the least restrictive environment is really essentially a play on separate is not equal, that our children have a right to be included in classroom spaces wherever it's appropriate and wherever it's practical, and that the assistance that they receive in the school setting is all designed to allow them to grow in rewarding and kind of normal peer relationships with their classmates. So with that said, if we could advance to the next slide, I am going to share with you my assumptions about who you are. And to the extent that there's something that I'm really missing about something that you feel like I should know about you as we're going through this presentation, please do type in your questions, and Rachel will break in and let me know if there are some things that you want me to take into consideration. So my assumptions are that everyone on board here are parents or students who may be experiencing some conflict with their schools. My second assumption is that you're committed to obtaining the best and most appropriate education for your student. And 3, that you're committed to developing our students into independent adults who are satisfied with life. If we can go to the next slide, the goals that I have in this presentation are to get all of our participants to get to a real core understanding of each of our children's potential and each of their functional challenges. This is a starting point where everything we do is about what our children need to be able to learn and to learn well. The second goal is to help all of us understand public education's role in education and its responsibility to our children. And then the third goal is to allow you to assemble some tools and processes that will help us productively engage with our school officials. Okay, so I'm off to the next slide. Um, so when I do this presentation in a live setting, this is an opportunity for me to find out where people are at, what school they go to, who they live with, what kind of interests you have, something that you love about the world. I would recommend, I'm not sure that we have time to do this, but if you want to chat those in, Rachel can break in and let me know what we get. But I would recommend that this is kind of a centering activity for us. I ask these questions because a lot of how our children get their security about their place in this world is in understanding what is home and where is their school, and to have a set of understandings about what makes our family, and also things about things that we'd love to be better about the world. I find that these are great questions to ask kids because it helps us understand where we might find some passion and things that we might be able to do to feed those passions through education and through experiences. Okay, so then the next slide is I'm going to give you my introduction. That giant picture is a picture of me. I live in Barrington. It's a northwest suburb of Chicago. I live with my husband of, I don't know, maybe 30 years. I've got two daughters, one who is at college. I have a niece who is at college but living with me. There are three dogs. Two of them are at home right now. One is at college. And we also have a cat. My education, I think, may be important to you. I am an attorney and I graduated from the Chicago Kent School of Law, which is part of the Illinois Institute of Technology. I arrived in Chicago to attend the University of Chicago, and I am a graduate of that fine institution. And I attended Hunter College High School in New York City, which is just a very interesting magnet school where we were infused with a sense of social justice as students. My experience in technology, I have served as a user interface expert and an information analysis expert. I have done extensive research in the fields of ethnography, market trends, legal trends, and institutions of higher education. I'm licensed to practice law in the state of Illinois, and I have dedicated my entire practice on serving the best interest of children, particularly in terms of health and education. All right, I think we're ready for the next slide. I am also in the trenches with you. My two wonderful daughters live with disabilities that are mostly invisible, but they are certainly disabling. I am very mom focused on mom strategies to help kids succeed because as moms and dads, we're the ones there every day, and we're the ones who see the little slips, and we can help shore our kids up and encourage them to keep moving forward. I also, in terms of being in the trenches, I've engaged really a huge variety of appropriate professionals who help me get my kids to succeed. They run the gamut of health professionals and therapeutic professionals and mental health professionals, as well as community-based professionals who help our kids really engage with the world and find their purpose in the world. And when I talk about success, my definition of success is focused on how happy are my kids and how confident they are in their own sense of independence and in their own sense of inclusion. Okay, so enough about me. Now I'm going to start into the first activity. This is an activity that I'm hoping that everybody on the call can maybe jot a couple of notes down. These are centering activities where we start before we start worrying about appropriate accommodations or appropriate services, the first thing is we need to really appreciate who our children are. Things that help us remember are talking about, are keeping a list of people that my child loves and things my child loves doing. Ways they love to play. Are they tricksters? Are they a little more reserved? Are they musical? Books that they love. What kinds of books do they enjoy? Or what kind of stories? Some of our children may not be traditional readers, but audiobooks count as reading. So what kind of stories do they love? What kinds of things do they do that make us proud of them? And what are some of the nice things that people say about my child? Those are frequently clues that help us take a little break and really remember much of what's wonderful about just being with our kids. Something my child is really good at. And it doesn't have to be, it definitely doesn't have to be a school subject. Some of our kids are kind of savants, and sometimes they are savants about things that are not academic, and that is fine. Those are the things that are their gifts, and they need to be celebrated. People who love my child, this really helps with centering yourself with a group of people who can help keep you encouraged and help keep you positive, even in the face of conflict, whether you're having it with school officials or other officials in the community. Good people I know because of my child. One of the things about having so many difficulties is that we meet a lot of really good people who have dedicated their careers to making sure our children are well. And those people are true gifts to know. And it's an opportunity that we wouldn't have gotten without some of the challenges that we face together. Good things I've experienced because of my child, same kind of thing. You sometimes meet the most interesting people or go to, or just have really wonderful experiences. And then stuff I appreciate because of my child. There are things that many of us would have taken for granted in the past, but because of what we go through with them, we realize actually how blessed we are in some ways that most people maybe might not appreciate. Okay, so then on to the battle. The educational rights that our children have. Their rights are actually constitutional protections that are guaranteed and protected under federal law. Their rights cannot be violated by state or local law. What that means is that just because a school has a program that doesn't quote unquote work that way, it doesn't give them the right to exclude our children if that would be an appropriate program for our children to participate in with some accommodations. So what are these rights? It's a right to a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment, and we talked about that at the beginning. It includes a right to reasonable accommodations to ensure full inclusion in your education. So things like an ergonomic chair or a bouncy chair or access to a fidget or permission to just stand up and get the wiggles out. Those are accommodations that are, they can be put together in a way that are reasonable. We need to balance what our children need with what the classroom needs to function. So perhaps like if our children need to get up and really move vigorously, that the agreement is that they'll move out of the sight line of their classmates, but not out of the classroom. There are other reasonable accommodations include things like having access to water or access to a snack or having an ability to take their notes with different kinds of tools. So there are many, many technologies available to help, but there are just a lot of attitudes that are helpful in allowing our kids to access their classroom. They also have a right to be free of discriminatory practices, including bullying. A discriminatory practice is something that just makes them feel unwelcome, that may make them feel threatened. And frequently, bullying is rooted in some habit or in something that someone looks like, or all kinds of other things that they're just unkind. But if they are rooted in aspects that are part of your child's condition, that is actually a discriminatory practice. It's a making someone feel unwelcome for a disabling condition that they don't have control over. Bullying is never right, whether it's rooted in being disabled or not. But the importance of understanding that some bullying is rooted in an attitude of discrimination, the importance of that is that there are huge consequences in the school environment, and that's a practice that schools don't want to allow to continue. And frequently being able to connect it to this constitutional protection provides just a little more incentive for schools to get it right. Okay, ready for the next slide? The role of a public school and their responsibilities. The federal law says that public school must provide all children a significant opportunity to receive a fair, equitable, and high quality education, and to close educational achievement gaps. What that means is that schools are responsible for educating our children. They don't have the right to tell us that they are not responsible for educating our child because our children's behavior doesn't conform to how they've set up their rules. The school behavior rules, the school discipline rules, those are all things that if they are getting in the way of our children receiving their education, those are things that must be accommodated by the schools. So it's not our children that need to do the impossible and suddenly become able to do things they can't. The responsibility is on the school to find modifications to their policies and their practices so that our kids can successfully participate. I also put in this little list of types of learning because there is a lot of different kind of learning that happens in a school environment. The academics are obviously central, but social and emotional learning, how we treat one another, how we treat other fellow citizens are part of what happens in a school. Schools teaching and education could possibly be focused on vocational goals. They can also be focused on preparatory goals, which are basically preparing children to be successful college students. And there's all kinds of other kinds of learning that the educational professionals have identified. And that all does go on. I think the main thing that I would like us to appreciate as parents is that there's a tremendous amount of thought that goes into how to educate our children. And that when we encounter a situation where what's set up seems to not serve our children, that I approach that as an unintentional oversight, an oversight that cannot stand, but an oversight that I am certain that with proper communication that we can overcome. Okay, so the next slide, please. Again, just to fill us with I don't know, I guess awe for what educators do. The educators in the public schools do have extensive coursework that they do at the college and graduate level to become qualified educators. They go through licensing requirements, they've taken tests, they've jumped lots of hoops to become teachers. They have the experience of having worked with other students. Even fledgling teachers have hours and hours of classroom experience that is required in order for them to get their licenses. And then most educators I know just engage in continuing ed on their own, both formally and informally, and they are all about educating children. What they are not are they, at least with regards to our children, they are not parents. And so that's great news because we are the parents and we need to have the authority to do all the things parents need to do. But they're not social workers, therapists, doctors, or law enforcement. And all of this is good news. One of the confusion points for parents it happens when we have kids that we may not have yet gotten them diagnosed. We don't really know what the source of their difficulties are. And at the point that we kind of get it a name, we get it a set of things that need to be accommodated, it gets a little frustrating when teachers jump up and say, oh, I've seen that before. And I know like these 9 things that I can do, and this will really help. And it does actually help. The thing that is a little confusing is that the teachers, as much as if you pull the right triggers, they know exactly what to do. At the same time, they're usually not trained diagnosticians. And so they do not have the time and probably not the training to be able to understand that the difficulties that they're encountering with our kids are rooted in some kind of condition they might have seen before. I've just seen so many times where that doesn't happen. And as a parent, I have been frustrated by that phenomenon. But I bring this up just to help us understand that, parents, because teachers are people and they have a huge job and they see many children a day. And things that we think would be common sense that they'd catch on with, they sometimes don't have time because they're delivering their teaching, they're helping our children learn. So this is just kind of a little bit of a long-winded way of saying our educators are pretty amazing, and that as amazing as they are not necessarily equipped to figure out how to help our kid on a one-off basis. That this is something that we need to do systematically as parents with the administration. Okay, next slide. I've also actually encountered some people asking, like, why does it matter? This is a slide that I like to provide to help us understand that, if our children have the ability and the talent to achieve academically, that there are real impacts in their financial well-being as they become adults. And particularly with kids with physical impairments, and my children also have pain conditions. A lot of the work that's available with less levels of education is actually work that's harder for them to do. And even though you never look at a child and you go, that child is destined for a desk job, whatever that might mean, in reality, a desk job is a little easier on the body. And so if we've got children who are capable of finishing high school, finishing community college, finishing a bachelor's or an advanced degree, it will really contribute to their well-being. As you can see, how the median weekly earnings at the different educational levels is really startling. And then on top of that, the unemployment rates go down in general as you get into these higher degree fields. So this is kind of part of what I'm looking at in terms of my children's success, is that I want to make sure that they're able to work and work at something that they can do well, that will pay them well, and that will provide a reasonable level of employment security to the extent that that's going to be possible. Okay, next slide. Okay, so in terms of documenting credentials, especially in terms of the first jobs, what gives you the right or the opportunity to work at these various jobs that require certain levels of learning. The standard way we get about that is to earn degrees and to be able to share transcripts from an accredited educational institution. For those of us who go different routes, then all of the trust that's built into a degree from an accredited education, that's stuff that we need to document and provide to others. So for example, for those of us who choose to homeschool or unschool, it does require, when we get to the next level, so for example, when it's time for our children to go to college, we're going to need to make sure that we can document the equivalencies. And it's not too hard to do at that level. You can take ACTs or SATs or AP or achievement exams. There's all kinds of testing that's available for us to help a school understand the quality of the education our children have earned through our unschooling. But we also need to choose our battles. The importance of an IEP and a 504 is it's about working with the accredited educational institution to allow our children to attend and get educated in a way that they earn standard degrees. And those standard degrees then do what they do for everybody else. They become part of our children's portfolios, and they are what's evaluated as they apply to colleges and go on to their working lives. So next slide, please. Okay. So in deciding that we are going to educate our children through standard public educational institutions, one of the things that we do need to do is equip ourselves with documentation that, in a sense, justifies the school taking this accommodative approach for our children. And one of the most important things to do is to kind of get on a single page all of the work that we are doing to keep our children healthy. And at some point, it's always helpful to have this kind of a list. And so I've developed this as a compact format for sharing with school nurses and other appropriate professionals to be able to understand all the work that we're doing, so that we don't spend all of our time in our meetings with schools being asked have you tried this? Have you tried that? Have you tried the other thing? Because our children live with complex medical conditions. We have secured the assistance of appropriate experts. And what I find is having this list gives me confidence to know that I really have not missed something terribly obvious. But it also allows a medical professional to see, oh, good, okay, I see you have You have a PCP, a primary care practitioner, who is helping you balance everything, that you have a therapist that's helping your child cope with the difficulties of having to think consciously about being able to do things that other kids don't appear to have any problems with. That we've got PTs and OTs and psychiatrists and cardiologists and gastroenterologists and orthopedists and neurologists and neurosurgeons and whomever else. The one thing that I realized that my children have that I didn't have growing up is they have a pretty amazing understanding of the scope of medical specialists available to help them with their conditions. The second column is just contact information so that we're not digging around for everything. Listing conditions treated. Some of our conditions are going to show up in multiple doctors' buckets. But I find that it helps me keep track of things, of knowing which specialists I'm asking to help me with which problem. And then at the end, to have prescriptions, therapies, treatments in a box by specialist, once again, so that I can really quickly direct the energies and questions of the school officials as we're trying to help our kids succeed. So maybe let's look at the next slide. So an understanding of all of our medical conditions are not so that we can educate the educators about medical conditions. They're not doctors. They're not really in a position to help us diagnose and treat our kids. The reason that is the list as the medical specialties help us. Our issue in the educational setting is how functional our students are. And so to understand like what that question is, I've created this list of what a functional student does. A functional student attends classes. She does homework. She takes quizzes and tests when they're scheduled. She passes from one class to the other during the allotted passing period. She concentrates and processes information on demand. If she's in a classroom and the teacher calls on her, she's going to be able to answer the question. She participates in extracurriculars. She performs community service. She probably works part-time in some gainful employment, and she does chores at home. A child that does all of those things without significant intervention is one who is functional and who doesn't need accommodations. So I can tell you with my children, every single thing on this list is a challenge. We have had trouble with attendance. We have trouble doing homework because they are exhausted and unpaid when they get home. My kids are great at doing tests and quizzes, but they're not always in the classroom when the tests and quizzes are given. And so that creates a whole bunch of management issues of when are we going to get these tests given? Because when they show up again, the test is over and there isn't really a good place to give them the tests unless we've set those things up. My kids usually could pass during passing periods, but sometimes they couldn't. Sometimes they needed more time. Sometimes during passing period, there'd be a panic attack and it would take some time for them to get to the next place. The processing information on demand, again, sometimes that didn't always work. Extracurriculars were a challenge. Community service they loved to do, but there frequently wasn't time and energy. Gainful employment wasn't. We just really set that as not a priority. And the does chores was also something that just didn't always happen. So in addition to that, I guess I'd like to open it up a little bit to see if people have some thoughts about other expectations of their students that are difficult, that might be difficult for them to meet in school. Okay, so Rachel, do we have any comments or no questions at this moment?
No questions right now.
Okay, that's fine. All right, so so these are the things that the IEP is about, of how do we overcome any functional deficiencies we have, because without them, let's look at the next slide. Um, I talk about the non-conformant student. You know, they, maybe you could call them non-functional. You could call them a lot of other things, I guess. But there are institutional effects on the kids that cannot meet those functional demands. And generally, what happens at school, if you're failing to meet the top half of that list at least, it can affect your academic placement. So you may be plenty smart, but something about how you perform in that classroom causes the school to place you in either less challenging classes, or you know, there's just a lot of possibilities of what could happen at that point. There can be academic penalties for missing homework or missing quizzes, or having trouble performing on a quiz because the day that you were given the quiz, you had a migraine. So those academic penalties of for late work, penalizing you from some letter grades, or not giving you an opportunity to make up work, those really can have a cumulative effect and make it difficult to pass your classes, let alone do well. And then there can be disciplinary penalties for being tardy after a passing period. It's not uncommon for a school to impose a detention after school. And for those of our kids that actually really need that time to recover from their school day, the detentions are just not, they're just not doable. The personal effects of the institutional response, there are health impacts. Our kids may have more trouble regulating their health. There are definitely emotional impacts of feeling like they're not able to succeed. There's definitely an opportunity impact that they may be placed in classes that maybe are not appropriate because of the way academic penalties build. And there's an inclusion impact that if they're in detention, then they're not able to socialize with their friends. If they're not able to take classes that interest them, it sends the message that they don't belong there, and that's just simply not true. So it is really important for us to support the kids that are gonna just in a real sense be unable to conform with the functional demands by the letter. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so I wanted to give a quick overview of how the legal rights work. There are various bodies of law, and they're created independently by different groups, and they define different aspects of a student's rights and responsibilities. There are times when the laws and the rules conflict, and there are very clear rules that define how to resolve conflicts. The rules are clear, but applying them can be a little tricky sometimes. But disabilities laws are a matter of constitutional law, and even if they're unwittingly violated at the local level, those are the laws that cannot be trumped by the local laws. That if there's a school law, a school handbook rule that has a discriminatory impact because of a disability, those rules really need to be rewritten. Ideally, the whole rule gets rewritten, but we're worried about getting our kids educated today. And so the IEPs and the 504 serve the very important purpose of, of, of neutralizing the laws that or neutralizing the rules in the school handbook that are going to prevent our kids from being educated properly. The governing documents, I put them sort of in the order of power. So basically, constitutional rights and protections, those stand no matter what. At the next level, there are federal laws, rules, and regulations. They tend to be written pretty broadly, but they talk about the responsibilities of schools. There's state constitution that I don't frequently work with because it doesn't come into play in the cases that I work with. The state law, rules, and regulations, those do define things like what coursework is required, what are the learning standards of every school in the state. Then there can be some local laws, rules, and regulations, the Board of Education rules, and then probably the most important document in terms of figuring out how to make school work for our kids is the school handbook. That really every school I've worked with has had those available on the website for our study. So if we go to the next slide, the process of getting our accommodations and our services together is a little bit of a maybe a tedious one. But this is the chart that you actually really need to fill out to really begin to get order to how the school deals with your children. On the left side of the chart, I've got 2 columns under the school rules. And then on the right side, I've got the accommodations requested. The thing that we need to do is actually we need to get our hands out on the student handbooks. We need to print them out, and we need to actually read them. And then fill out this chart with every rule that is going to create some problems. I've seen student handbooks that have had dress codes that banned things like leggings, which some of my students, that was the only thing they could wear without being overly uncomfortable and distracted and unable to learn. So there's sometimes things as simple as dress codes. There's sometimes things that there are rules about lining up in hallways, being quiet in hallways, bus behavior, the homework rules, late penalties, all of those things tend to be in the student handbook. And I include on my list everything that could be a problem. And this is where some things get a little confusing. Our goal is always that our children are able to do everything that's expected of any other student. But in order to be able to perform that, they may need a little extra help. One of the things I have found happens a lot with the students I work with is that they may have some sort of processing disorder that makes reading difficult, and so they need to be given tools that allow them to hear the text as they look at it. Others have motor skills issues. With pain, a lot of times things like writing can be very difficult. And so commonly I put into IEPs that kids need to be allowed to turn in the homework essentially however they can get it turned in. So if they're able to keyboard, let's keyboard. If they're not able to keyboard, but they can talk about it, we need them to we need the teachers to accept work that may have been handwritten by someone else. So, for example, when my kids can't write or they can't really look at the screen without getting a migraine, I would I would read the assignment with them, and I would have them tell me what the answers were, and I would write down what they said. Sometimes it's me, sometimes it's a classmate, sometimes it's a tutor. But interestingly, without that written in as an accommodation, many teachers will not accept handwritten work at all, and definitely they have issues with accepting handwritten work that doesn't look like it was written by the student. So those are the kinds of things that we want to catch. So when we identify a rule, we also then we describe the difficulty, the condition or the limitation, that there's pain or that there's limited motor control or whatever the issue is. Then to the extent we can describe suggested accommodations, what we think might make it work better. But with the emphasis that this is a suggested accommodation, this is the best I can do as my child's parent. And then in terms of the verifying doctor column is really for the doctor who's aware of the difficulty. One of the things I've had issues with some doctors is that because they are not educators, they're not willing to tell a school how they're supposed to do their teaching, and I think that's appropriate. And what we're trying to do here is to just identify what's the difficulty, and essentially the verifying doctor is the doctor who's helping us treat that underlying challenge. In my book, I suggest that you can create this. I have a sample letter from a doctor to verify the request for accommodations, and the doctor is just basically saying that I've looked at this list and I agree with what's in it, with the conditions that I am responsible for, and whatever the school can do to accommodate this individual so it's not a problem is requested. It's kind of a little crazy way of talking about things, but just as you really don't want your neurosurgeon coming in and telling you how to cook dinner, we don't want doctors telling educators how to educate. But we do want the doctors to say, here is the problem that I'm trying to treat. We're doing the best we can, but given what this rule is saying, we think our student's going to have trouble meeting that requirement. So this is kind of a long it's a long process to fill out this chart, and you go back and forth and you update it as you go. But I find that getting the information out this way to the school helps the school think about the challenges in a more holistic way, that it's not you're asking me to do this and I'm doing this, but it's really an understanding that I've set up my school in a way that is going to systematically cause the student problems. So let's systematically talk about how we're going to neutralize those problems for this student. And then ready for the next slide. Thank you for listening to this presentation. I hope that you've learned a little something. If you need more, I do have a book on school accommodations. It's available online via Amazon. It's a Kindle and a paperback version that are available. I have some information available on my website at marifranklinlaw.com. And you can email me questions or text me. If you would like to hire me to help you with your 504 and IEP meetings, I would be happy to do that. And the last thing is that I implore you to just continue to love your children as you do, because that is the most important thing to help them get through life and get through life successfully. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Mari. That was really informational. And I do actually have a question that we have from somebody who's been on, Marcia. And her question for you is my oldest graduates this year. I have fought with the school since ninth grade, trying to get him a 504. I've been told over and over again by the school nurse as well as GI as his counselor that in high school it'd be hard to get one. He's missed 18 days so far this year due to horrible flares. Ankylosing spondylitis and scoliosis takes a terrible toll on him. He's being threatened now with not being able to walk with his class, and he's devastated. His grades are great. He tries hard, and he's not a troubled child. His autoimmune is something he cannot control. Is this legal?
Okay, so the answer to is this legal? Answer's no. But the bigger issue is that he's being told that he's not meeting graduation requirements, and that's related to the absences. I am so sorry to hear about how much pain that he's experiencing, and I hear what you're saying in that the problem is not his academics. The problem are the school rules. This is something that this is kind of something that I am happy to work with families on getting under control. But the basic process is to identify the school rules that are being violated. So, he is technically he's violating the attendance rules, and to demand accommodations because these are all medically driven, and so I guess I would need to know a little more about sort of specifically what they're saying. But if I were to guess, they're trying to kind of threaten him into coming to school when he's not able to come to school. So there are kind of there are two approaches. One is that should he graduate? It sounds like from what the questioner has written down, he should graduate. He's fulfilling all of the academic requirements, and that's not the problem. In this past year, the state has gotten much stricter on attendance rules, and that may be what the school is responding to. The school counselor and the school nurse are not the experts in whether a 504 is appropriate. They are part of a team that helps determine whether it is, but it's actually a school administration decision. To the extent that they're responding to like the tightened attendance requirements across the state, it would be in the school's best interest to put a 504 in place that protects your student against this kind of a threat, but it also protects the school against losing whatever it is they might lose, funding or what have you, based on your child's attendance. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. Yes. Thank you so much, Mari. And if there's a follow up to that, she said thank you.
Oh, good.
Okay, and we have another question, and I just want to remind everyone, if you have a question while we have Mari online, you can type it in the question box. So the next question, Mari, is how long does a school have to make the accommodations once they are made? Meaning the school has agreed to paint a strip on the stairs for my child who's visually impaired, but it has not been completed yet. How long is a reasonable time to wait, being that my child is falling on these steps?
Well, so I'm sorry to laugh. I mean, my answer is, go get a bucket of paint and go do it now. But in all fairness, right, the schools have their work orders, they have whatever special paints they need to get. But in general, I would expect it to be no more than 30 days. For specific, it really depends on what their process is. And instantaneously is probably not reasonable, but I don't think it's unreasonable to expect it in a week or two. And definitely within a month it seems like that's when it should happen because the school year is short. If things are taking a really long time, though, it does make sense to just contact the administrator and remind them that my as part of my IEP or 504 that's dated on this date, we agreed that this was going to happen, the painting of the stairs, and it's now X number of school days after it, and my child is still falling. And can you let me know when you're expecting to complete this fix because I'm getting concerned?
Great. Thank you so much. The next question is, when your student has a 504 and they begin to miss a lot of school, what types of accommodations can you ask for from the school for your homebound student?
So, homebound tutoring can be a little tricky. I think it's simpler the younger the children are. As you get older, the requirements of the homebound tutor to be highly qualified in the subject areas that they're tutoring for can create some challenges for a school. Did our I guess one of my questions is what grade level is the student at? And we'll give our questioner time to answer that question. But homebound tutoring, I think a lot of our kids fit under the paradigm of intermittent homebound tutoring, which is available for students who are anticipated to miss a minimum of 10 school days over the course of a school year. And these things need to be set up really pretty far in advance because they are a little complicated to coordinate. But the arrangement that has ended up working well for my kids and for some other students I work with is to get a primary homebound teacher who's really more like a project manager than necessarily as a subject expert. And this is someone who's in the school building who can chase down teachers, who can get the materials that are missed, who can administer tests at home, and do some teaching and coaching at home to help our students keep up and connected in their classwork.
Okay, and Mari, that was a sixth grader for that question.
Okay, so sixth grade is an interesting year because that's typically the first year kids are starting to have different teachers for different subject areas. And there's a lot more to coordinate and balance than in elementary school when they used to just have one teacher all day. And so things that we can do with our elementary school teacher of keeping things organized, they become harder at this higher level. A lot of schools do have teaching teams that go across the middle school levels so that there is one counselor type of person who is responsible for your student across his or her teaching team. And this is something that you may need an advocate to help you with just to get everybody thinking the right way about these things. But in general, my recommendation is that there is a central person who is making sure to be in contact with your student, so that you're making sure that your student has access to all the materials that they need. That core person also would be the person who coordinates with the person who comes to your house to do the teaching and coaching in your home for the days that are missed. And then depending on what your absence pattern is, you're going to need to figure out at what point you're triggering the teacher coming over. Is this something that you set like a standing weekly appointment that you use only if you have absences that week? Or is it something that in general, when you have an absence, it's a 2 or 3 day absence, so that that the second day or the third day is when the tutor starts coming in and comes in regularly until you're back to school?
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Mari.
Sure.
Right now, that is the last of our questions.
Great.
And I want to thank you so much, Mari. I feel like you gave us all so much information and places to get started, and you to go further with as we need you as our children grow older. So we really, really appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy to talk to your group.
Well, thank you. And I want to remind everyone that this webinar is recorded. So if you missed something, you can link back to it through the U.S. Pain Foundation and on the Pediatric Pain Facebook page. Again, you can write down Mari's information or you can reach out to us for it again. We appreciate all of your time and your questions, and we will see you next month, February 27th, for our next webinar, Age is Just a Number, a Pediatric Pain Warriors Tips on Advocating for Yourself. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we will see you next month.